people generally don't know that they're contributing to a marginal percentage of that insurance to SASRIA. So in the event that your car is damaged, but due to a political unrest event, then we would have to pay for that claim. We have about 60 insurers, across South Africa that we deal with. I think South Africa is particularly significant because I think we do make a bigger effort, even if you look at it from a government parliamentary perspective and across the job roles. I definitely think we have a bigger push to make sure that we've got women in particular roles.
Hello and welcome to this episode of ITWeb TV. My name is Simnike Mzekandaba. Today in studio, I'm joined by Fiona-Oakley Smith, who is the Chief Information Officer at Sasria. Welcome, Fiona. We look forward to hearing more about your work and what Sasria is up to.
Thank you for having me.
Just so that we get a sense of, what the organization does, can you just briefly tell us about Sasria in terms of, what it is exactly that you guys do?
So Sasria is a state-owned company that manages special risk insurance. So it covers things like political unrest, strikes, riots, terrorism. So everything that, renowned from a South African special risk perspective.
Mm. And you mentioned quite a few areas that, that you guys look after. But what was the mandate to actually establish the organization? What drove that?
So it was established in 1979. If you remember the Soweto uprising of 1976, so Sasria was formed as a reaction to that. So initially, the private insurance market could not adequately cover the risks of, as you would imagine, that those events were becoming more and more frequent. So basically, they started to create a risk pool of all the insurers where they contributed to a fund, and that was used to cover it. Then in 1998, Sasria was then established as a company in its own right from a public perspective. So it still covers the same risks, but now acting as a public company with the government as its major shareholder.
So then who contributes to it if it's like an insurer of events such as political unrest? Is it, like you said, it's a state-owned company, so would it be government that's...
So like you would contribute to your insurance policy. So we cover assets like your house, car, that sort of thing from a private perspective. And then obviously from a corporate perspective, buildings, money, that sort of thing. So in a normal insurance policy, you would pay for the damages to buildings. And then there would be a small contribution that is voluntary now. But I think generally people generally don't know that they're contributing to a marginal percentage of that insurance to SASRIA. So in the event that your car is damaged, but due to a political unrest event, then we would have to pay for that claim.
Okay, so I would, as a citizen or a civil person,
insured person, yes, yeah.
Would I then be able to claim
from SASRIA? Yes, but you would normally.
But I don't know that I'm contributing. But
no, and you also probably would submit your claim through to your insurer, and your insurer would then contact SASRIA. And should we see that the peril was related to one of those events, then we would say, okay, fine, and we would cover that value of the claim.
So then is it safe to assume that you guys had quite a hectic time during the July unrest? Was it in 2022?
So I think 2021. Yeah, so I think the July 2021 unrest was probably the only next significant sort of catastrophic event since 1976.
Is it?
It was really been the thing that's tested SASRIA. So major catastrophic. So you'd normally have your things like the truck violence and minor sort of service delivery protests and that sort of thing. But in terms of a fully, an event that affected so many people and with such high claims, I think the July 2021 unrest was probably the most significant since 1976.
Okay. And just if we're looking at numbers, what was the highest claim that you received?
So the event affected mostly KZN and Gauteng, and the total value of claims was about 32 billion rand.
Sure, that's a lot of money. And how long then does it normally take to pay out? Or like, what were there hurdles, or what? Can you just paint a picture for us in terms of what happened during that?
So of course there would have been hurdles, because you would have imagined that all insurers were inundated with claims. But I think from a SASRIA perspective, the pride is that in a year, we probably covered all the claims that needed to be paid out. And obviously there are sort of incidents where we need to contest or investigate and that sort of thing. But in all, I think it probably took about a year to recover from an insured perspective.
Okay. What are some of you guys' like the most pressing challenges that Sasria has had to deal with since, or that you can also share with the audience?
So I think definitely there's an increased frequency and intensity of these sort of catastrophic events, if you think about July 2021, but also across the globe in terms of other extremist activities, wars, for example, and I think that's also been contributing to our limited reinsurance or the capacity from reinsurers to give us that reinsurance. So with them being under intense pressure around other catastrophes, even if you think about weather events, all of these pool of global reinsurers provide sort of the insurance of last resort to everybody. So they're under increasing pressure. That leaves us with less money to tap into from a reinsurance perspective, which means that we need to retain a larger share of the risk. Inadequate capital reserves. So should we have another event like July 2021, and if that were to happen in sort of consecutive years, then we'd definitely be left with less capital reserves. From an insurance perspective, because the insurers really have your policy, they have your data, we have a data deficiency from a SASRIA perspective. We only really know who our client is when you claim. So that also, it hampers our ability to accurately profile those risks, investigate premiums, and develop effective mitigation strategies. Also, in South Africa, I think the biggest topic is unemployment. So these worsening socioeconomic conditions increase the likelihood of our unrest, which would lead to more frequent claims. And then again, back to the insurance. So the insurers are really, it's a great model in terms of how we are able to leverage insurers in terms of distributing our product, but also it becomes then a bit of a constraint in terms of distributing it to, for example, the uninsured, right? So people who really need this kind of insurance, SMMEs, and lower income markets who don't have traditional insurance but may want to take out SASRIA insurance. We have limited distribution opportunities in that area.
What are you, Sasria, then doing to kind of, fill in these gaps?
So from a capacity perspective, I don't think there's really much. I think we're really at the mercy of the global stage. So from a capital, reinsurance, that sort of thing. But where we're definitely focusing on is from a data perspective. So right now, we are engaged in a huge data and analytics project. It's probably the most exciting thing that I'm doing right now. So all of that insurance data that we traditionally didn't have access to, we're trying to get that from the insurers. We've just gone live in January with getting it from our personal lines and commercial insurers. And then in July, we started looking at the data coming from corporates. So it seems like, just get the data. But if you can imagine that every single insurer's data set looks different. They have different systems. We are needing to sort of meet with them halfway in terms of what we need in data quality versus what they can give us. And I think I'm happy to report that to date we've received at least a sample from every single insurer in South Africa. So that has been one of our biggest achievements to date. And now we'll start the grueling task of looking at the data quality and trying to improve that, working alongside the insurers. So getting that data, so not just, getting the data in itself is not an achievement or helping to mitigate some of those factors, but getting the data means that we then have a deeper view into the risks that we insure. If we are able to look at patterns and analyze the risk exposure, for example, we'll be able to give that information to our reinsurers to sort of reassure them that we understand the risk, that hopefully that will give us then, or give them more appetite to insure us. We could implement risk mitigation strategies. So knowing where, for example, riots have occurred in the past, how do we engage with those communities and start developing programs to mitigate certain risks or educate people. Our marketing department has been on a real drive to educate people around their right to protest, but also to be conscious about damaging property and the impact that causes long term for those societies who live around there after the event.
So if you're saying that you guys have received the data sets from all the insurers in South Africa, how many is that? Like, is there a figure?
Yes, so we have about 60 insurers, across South Africa that we deal with. And each of them may also have UMAs. For example, we have some of your big insurers will have 5 UMAs or brokers that they deal with. And so they're having to collect that data themselves, consolidate that and send that through to us. So 60, but multiple files coming from insurers.
So then how would you unpack that data? Like what systems and technologies I'm guessing you would need to kind of unpack it and see what it brings out. What are you guys
100%.
So guys doing around that?
So initially, there's been a number of initiatives from Sasria over the years to try and get this data. It's been quite a requirement for some years. I think the difference with the current project, and I can't take credit for that because I've only come in January, so there's been sort of work before I've come in, was to then say, look, we need a way to standardize first of all, because if we have all of this disparate data, all of the efforts come in afterwards, and that's where we really stumble. So what we did from a personal lines and commercial perspective was said, look, this is the data specification that we need, and gave them sort of interpretation of the field. So we had a very strict requirement in terms of how we wanted the data in. So that provided us at least with a standard, but at the same time, it brought a constraint. Some of the insurers couldn't meet that specification. It was sort of too tight and we had to evolve. So we do have a specification. We've made it a bit looser now for personal lines and commercial, and that's enabled us to get at least a first level of quality in. We utilize a Microsoft stack in terms of our data warehouse solution and what we will be doing. So in order to improve the data quality, we'll start be introducing things like machine learning to develop patterns of the data that we're seeing, starting to look at sort of the manual quality. So as we've gotten the data, we've seen certain patterns in the data, and we want to start developing that into automated tools that as the data comes in on a monthly basis, it will also be able to pick up some of the manual things and that we've been seeing as well. From a corporate perspective, it wasn't so easy, so we couldn't dictate to say you need to give us, because the data there, if you can imagine a corporate like a retailer, for example, it's not just their building. They've got distribution houses, they've got retail stores. So if you think about all the assets that they insure, they've got fleets of vehicles. It would be very different, right, from just one sort of commercial household person. So we really needed to be more flexible, and we really said to them, look, send us what you can, how you can do that. So now we have this massive cross-functional team from IT, from actuarial, quality assurance, internal audit, who are all looking at refining those. We've now defined it into 3 different levels of quality checks that we can leverage to be able to make sure that the quality of the data is great. So that's then step 2, I guess, data collecting, and then sort of the second step being data quality checks. But to your point, we've initially used manpower. So what do we know? Because the intelligence is built into our company, right? The people who work with the data every day, and then how then we take that intelligence and build it into our data warehousing tool.
It seems like you guys, there's like quite a lot happening around the data. What is the investment looking like from a financial point of view in terms of what you guys need to achieve? How much has the organization set aside to achieve this? Like when we talk numbers, what are we looking at?
So it's quite significant based on the fact that we are in an investment phase. So we spend currently 32% of our annual expense budget on IT and related matters. We've already invested a lot in the underlying technology, but we'll need to then spend more money on the analytics tools, visualization tools, the sort of machine learning tools that I'm talking about that will be able to develop certain patterns, as well as the next part, which I think is the most exciting part of all, is data enrichment, looking at what data we can get from a social media perspective, from different institutions where we can see perhaps even real-time certain things happening on the ground. And that's really going to need us to implement a lot of analytics so that we can start not just looking at what has happened, but also starting to predict what will happen and start warning our customers of perhaps things look a bit tense over there. Maybe you want to protect your vehicle, that sort of thing. And that's where we're looking to go.
Okay. Sounds like if you'll be using, lots of stuff happens on social media, because a lot of people say that
yes,
stuff
right?
is usually there.
And usually
there's like you just need to be a bit more observant or look at,
or savvy. I think there's generally what we've also found is that there's certain accounts, right, that are very much prevalent in looking at these sort of things. So there's a couple of people that we would know, they're always on the lookout for example, the truck strikes, or and we've also partnered with some institutions where, for example, the Consumer Goods Council, who already has intelligence for their trucks that are distributing food, goods all over the country, to sort of alert them of particular unrests happening in their path. So we'll be looking to partner with some of those. We wouldn't want to reinvent the wheel. We've already started garnering those sort of information so that we can then overlay it on our insurance data to be able to see where those risks might be happening.
And would you also maybe partner with telematics companies as well, like to provide? Would that be something to do or not?
So not from an immediate perspective, and I think that for example, people like the Consumer Goods Council are already doing that with telematics devices in trucks. I think what we would want to see is more from a SASRIA. We're more interested in sort of predictive analysis for us, and then leveraging what there is out there. So we don't necessarily engage with the end customer. But at the same time, we recognize that we want to assist them as well. But what you'll find is that in South Africa, not even insurers, but even the big retailers, for example, your big corporates are already investing in those technologies themselves. So what we wouldn't want to do is sort of, go into that space. We'd really want to be leveraging the things that they're doing to improve our data quality.
And Fiona, you mentioned at the start of our conversation, you spoke about that you joined Sasria in January.
So only 7 months.
So what is how are you finding this role as someone who's who has a CIO at Sasria? What does your role entail? How is it for you?
So So I mean, I'm still a newbie, I think, but I think my boss would say my honeymoon period is now over. The realities of the job has really sunk in. But I think different to my previous role. So I come from a multinational insurance organization where I was the head of IT for Sub-Saharan Africa. So I headed up South Africa and Kenya from an IT perspective. However, because it was a global insurer, and I was necessarily, so the IT manager is more of a caretaking role. I think from a strategic perspective, things are already done for you. You're really just enacting sort of the business and IT strategies that have already been decided. Whereas at SASRIA, my role is really to work with other executives on the board to help assist in developing the long-term company strategy, as well as partnering with executives so that we can craft an IT strategy that really supports their business goals. So ultimately the buck stops with me, which is much more responsibility than I've been used to having, and also making sort of those decisions, really questioning the road that we're taking, and then starting to maybe reformulate or rubber stamp the decisions that have already been made.
Like you said, the buck stops with you.
Yeah, so there's no pressure, but a little bit of pressure. Yeah.
Okay, and then you being a CIO, we normally find that these are mainly male roles, or men take up the roles of CIO. And I'm sure it's the same in insurance, in the insurance industry. Yeah. So how has it been for you if you can just describe your experience of taking on a role that's traditionally considered male, for a man,
So, and it's interesting because I think the cross-section of insurance and IT, right? I think there couldn't be a more male-dominated space. I think, so I became the head of IT, as I said, in my previous company in 2020. Funnily enough, the manager who recruited me into AIG initially was a woman, but she was probably the only, if I think about the leaders at the time, she was probably the only woman. And I must say that she probably influenced a lot of and was quite a role model for me in the sense that she was very strong, but very technical, but also incredibly womanly in the sense that she was empathetic. She was a mom. I was pregnant at the time. She was, very, very worried about me and concerned. And so all of those elements of sort of the mother figure had come out in her. Coming into insurance at the time, I really did notice that it was really, if you call it, traditionally call it a boys' club. But I think a lot of it had mostly to do with me. So yes, if I don't have a sad story of saying, was so ostracized or excluded. I think most of the exclusion or the huge sense of imposter syndrome came from me, from the fact that there was nobody really who looked like me. And I think I needed to fight those things. I needed to fight those things by myself. What I can say is that my sort of natural tendency to talk, to share, being vulnerable, it did create a sense of trust with my other colleagues. So across the whole of EMEA, we were only 2 females, but I think that being able to be vulnerable with them and share my experiences and my insecurities allowed them to really be supportive to me. Yeah.
But are you seeing any changes? Like if you say that you, at the time that your previous place of employment, right? One woman who was in a leadership role and then you come in. But over time, have you noticed there's been any women taking up like leadership roles within the insurance space? And in which areas would you say those are?
Sure. I think, if we look at, so I think it was a Deloitte paper that said that 1 in 4 tech leaders in big tech companies were women in the year 2022. From an insurance perspective, even if I look at our board at Sasria, the majority, I think there might be 3 males out of a group of 12, for example, on the board. I think South Africa is particularly significant because I think we do make a bigger effort, even if you look at it from a government parliamentary perspective and across the job roles. I definitely think we have a bigger push to make sure that we've got women in particular roles. The insurance industry specifically, I think, has been very intentional. When I joined the industry from supply chain, I was consulting in supply chain back then in 2010. I think not only from a woman perspective, but even from a transformation perspective, it was it was dominated mostly by white males, mostly Afrikaans. And I remember going to a Sasria conference actually and just thinking, wow, it is incredibly dominated with a particular group of people. And now if you go to the same conference, I think definitely you can see from a transformation perspective, it's majority Black, and there are probably more than 50% of them are women. So there's definitely been an intentional transformation that has existed within the insurance industry, particularly in South Africa.
And for someone who's watching this interview and is thinking, oh, I don't think I could ever be the CIO of a company. What does it take to be, the CIO of an organization like Sasria?
So it's so interesting. I always think of myself as a business analyst, okay? So even though there's this title now, I remember wanting to be a business analyst when I first read about it in my studies, thinking, oh, this is so interesting. You get to speak to developers and that's quite technical, but you also get to speak to business and understand what they're about. So I think really, forget about the title for a second. I think ultimately it's about curiosity, wanting to really know what makes developers tick and be able to explain things, and then also being curious about technology in general, being curious about business and how that functions, and being curious about processes, people, and how to take them from one place, to another place. Because that is really, technology is one thing, but making technology that people don't want to use then is kind of worthless. So I think, instead of looking at a CIO title, I think it's really about the curiosity around all those facets. Not only in a business, but even if you think about your personal life, what it takes to sort of have tough conversations, ask the whys. It's really hard work and just being curious.
I think so you spoke about, plans around the issues around data deficiency, but then there's plans to plug in those gaps. So my question then is, how easy is it to kind of like bring in new technologies within to improve the processes of the organization and its work? Or how easy has it been, or is it going to be?
Well, I think if I look at what has happened in Sasria in the last 5 years, I think many companies would have also, if not on that journey already, had to quickly get onto a journey of digitization, right? Looking at COVID, people working from home. And Sasria had a 5-year strategy around digitalization of all of their processes. In that time frame, implemented things like ERP solutions, CRM, state-of-the-art claims system. And when you ask if it's easy, I mean, it's easy enough in the sense that I said, the buck stops with me. So ultimately, it's around being able to craft a business case that really substantiates that need for investment. So it's not incredibly difficult. Having said that, though, considering the journey that we've come from, the thing to keep in mind is to not continually deploy technology for the sake of it and get the organization into sort of this change fatigue. Because as I said, it's the people who have to use the technology. And if you're constantly introducing new things and changing processes, you'll find very quickly that the opposite is happening. Where you're trying to introduce efficiency, you most likely are just creating some confusion. So yes, we're definitely looking to introduce new technology over the next couple of years, but really in the sense that we want to, take the process first, make that more efficient, and build on what the really good platform that we've built in the last 5 years.
So what are those technologies that you guys have in the pipeline for the next short-term period?
So we've been dabbling a little bit we've got Copilot, which is a generative AI tool, which is already deployed across for everybody to use in the organization. We haven't really had a program. So what we've done is we've said, let's just sort of experiment individually with it. And then we'll start investigating those use cases, how we could then really sort of streamline our administration using Copilot. Like I said, from a machine learning perspective, we're really looking at the technologies around data, how we can introduce machine learning to start picking up those patterns so that we don't have to keep reprogramming additional trends that we're seeing. And then on top of that, some predictive analytics, visualization tools.
Sounds like there's quite a lot happening. Also, Fiona, just like insurance, you mentioned lots and lots of data, but most industries obviously have to evolve in terms of, the tech advancements that we're witnessing. How do you see it, Pofnat? How do you see the insurance sector's evolution in the age of just how tech is just moving at such a fast or a rapid pace?
So, sure. I think, there's a couple of things, right? What I can say is I told you that I came from the retail industry. When I first joined insurance in 2010, I just thought, wow, the sector's so backward. Like, I think the insurance sector was very slow to market in terms of picking up technological advancements. And when I joined, there was always this thing to say, it's very different, it's very different. There's nothing that can be standardized. But I think in the last 5 to 10 years, it's really moved at a very rapid pace. And so you've seen things like data analytics, which has allowed better risk assessment, more accurate pricing. You've seen online marketing chatbots, AI tools. People like insurtechs like Naked, who have really they've got an end-to-end digital solution where they don't even have any call centers or people that they talk to. And then things like robotics automation, which I think with additional analytics tools automation tools have probably helped to streamline operations. So I just see that those things picking up. And from a customer, not so much for Sasria because we do have a different business model, but for general insurers, for example, making use of generative AI tools so that they don't need humans. And sometimes people actually prefer to speak to the chatbot because the chatbot has the right answer. So I think making use of all of those things to make it more accessible for people to be able to get insured.
Hopefully they'll need the humans at some stage. But Fiona, thank you so much for your time. We've had a lovely chat. We've covered all our questions, so I think we could.
Thank you so much.
That was Fiona-Oakley Smith. She is the Chief Information Officer at Sasria. For more on these, please subscribe here.